Welcome to the Defence Connect podcast, Australia's leading voice in national security and defence industry intelligence, direct from the nation's top policy and business experts.
Welcome back to the Defence Connect podcast. You've got senior journalist Robert Dougherty, and we're talking again with Ambassador Myroshnychenko from Ukraine, a Ukrainian ambassador to Australia. That's right. What's happening so far in terms of Ukrainian support, Australian support for what's happening in Ukraine, and what's the situation like from your point of view, diplomatically?
Let's just look at the last weekend, because last weekend was probably the most massive attack that Russians have undertaken for the past 3 years. 2 nights in a row, 300 drones, 70 missiles were sent into Ukraine. Our system still kind of intercepted many of those, but many still reached the target because Russians have pursued targets in different parts of Ukraine. My friends in Kiev had 2 sleepless nights, and as you know, deprivation of sleep is a form of torture. So they've gone through that experience for 2 nights in a row. It's pretty tough. Russians are not currently advancing. They feel that time is on their side. They pretend to be negotiating peace, but they're not interested in peace. What they're interested in is subjugating Ukraine, destroying Ukraine's sovereignty, and they are just on a go. And this is where we are. So I don't think Russia's going to stop anytime soon. Most likely there will be some sort of break in November when they're going to reach winter. But for now, we are, courageously fighting. But the reason is that we have a super strength. And our super strength is that we don't have any alternative, because we cannot stop fighting. Russians will take over. So we have to carry on no matter what, and we just want to make sure that America, European Union, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, they're all supporting us, because we are fighting your fight. We are fighting for democracy, we are fighting for human rights, we are fighting for rules-based international system, which Russians so blatantly violated. And therefore, it's a bigger game. It's not just Russia's war in Ukraine. Some politicians in Australia about 2 years ago were saying that it's a war long way away. No, it's not. It's very close to you. Russians have a large presence in the Pacific. They have a large fleet in Vladivostok. They've been doing joint naval military exercises with Indonesia.
Yes.
That was only 1,300 kilometers away from Darwin, and that was just in November. Russians requested Indonesia to provide them space for their strategic bombers.
Not to mention that alliance with
Exactly,
China as well.
China and North Korea.
North
Koreans are now fighting Ukrainians in Europe. Tell me, when was the last time we had Asians fighting in Europe? When was it? I cannot recall. In my memory, there were
Maybe the Mongols.
Who came to Kiev and raised Kiev. In 13th century, it was 1240. This is when Ukrainians stopped Mongols from going further to Europe. But they raised Kiev, they burned it down entirely, but we stopped. They stopped there. So that was, Genghis Khan and his empire, Mongol empire. But now we have North Koreans fighting in Ukraine. This is just horrible. Yeah. And, this is next door to Australia. If North Koreans get emboldened with all the technologies they get from the Russians and decide to invade South Korea, what's going to happen to your trading routes? How are you going to do business with Japan? What's going to happen to your trade with China? I think it will all be disrupted. What about your access to fuel, which most of that you get from Singapore? If Malacca Straits are blocked, you're not going to get any petrol.
It's part of a wider bipolar world, isn't it? A multipolar world.
No. It's just a jungle. It's not even a multipolar world. What we are now seeing is if you don't have nuclear weapons, you're vulnerable. What's the fate of your countries here in the region, in the Pacific? I mean, they have no chance.
It's a bit of a wake-up call for Australia, isn't it?
It is, because Australia has no chance either.
Yeah.
You cannot defend yourself. If America abandons Europe, if America abandons you, who's going to protect you? You don't have any sovereign defense capabilities. What we can help you, and we can help you, Ukraine wants to help Australia to build your sovereign defense capabilities.
Yeah.
Based on our experience, based on the lessons learned from the war. Certainly we still need your help. We need more Bushmasters, we need more M13s. We are very thankful to the Australian government for support today. I hope Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will go to Kiev soon, and maybe in June, and work on that. And we need your support. But, 3 years later now, we can help you. Because what we have, you might have seen the news that Ukrainian underwater drone has shot down a fighter jet.
Yes, I did see that, yeah.
It got into the Black Sea port of Novorossiysk and shot down a fighter jet from underwater. I mean, this is like science fiction.
There's the battle experience there, the industry. We know that Ukraine has their Brave One manufacturing hub, which can deliver, equipment to units and things like that.
100%. And you see that's very, because war is a mother of innovation. There's so many things that are happening there, and we take the technology from you're helping us, we send it to the battlefield, we see what works, we see what doesn't work, and then we improve things which work. But the innovation cycle is now 6 to 8 weeks. In all these autonomous systems, it's 6-8 weeks. It changes very quickly, and now there are only 2 countries in the world who have the capabilities which are the best in the world. It is Russia and Ukraine. Russia is aligned with North Korea and Iran.
And China.
Chinese are learning for that a lot, by the way.
I mean, they were heavily involved in the recent military parade in Moscow.
How? Absolutely. I mean, what kind of signal Chinese are sending to Australians by going to a parade?
Yeah. I mean,
what kind
Putin
of signal?
and Xi Jinping sitting side by side in the
Correct.
parade. That's a big signal.
Yeah, and Chinese are now learning from this war, so they're going to have access to all the technologies that Russians are now coming up with, which they kind of come up through the war, through that experience. And what does it mean for your future? How can you build your deterrence, and what that deterrence would look like?
What do you think that looks like in terms of Ukraine had some combat experience against Russians? There was that invasion in 2014, I think. How does that look for Australia? We never really had that land invasion, even against the Japanese in World War II. What do you think that looks like for the Australian public? Do they realise what the danger is there?
I don't think so. And look, and I don't blame Australian public for not realising it. In a way, when war broke out, and Australian people are very supportive of Ukraine, don't get me wrong, and I'm very thankful for that. My 3 years here, I've been to different forums, I've spoken to different people, and probably the support of the Australian people is what defines the support of the Australian government. I think Australian government knows what people think. Australian people don't like bullies. They hate Putin. They want to support Ukraine.
They like the underdog as well.
And we're fighting. Yeah, and we are fighting. A bigger war, and in a way, but there is a limit to how much of video footage or news you can read about war. It's all negative news. People get killed. There is torture. There is rape. There is lots of graphic photographs. How much of that can a human brain digest? So what happens? People just plug off.
Yeah.
And I know I can't because that's my war. But I remember when wars were in Syria, when wars were in Iraq, you kind of read about it, but then you kind of stop reading about it, right? Because it's just the way human brain works. You need to protect your mental health, so you kind of like shut yourself down and focus on something else. Look, but at the same time, our war is different because it's not just Russia's war in Ukraine. Because the way this war is going to play out will define not only security architecture in Europe, but globally. How it is impacting Indo-Pacific is already pretty clear, and we see how authoritarian regimes in the region are projecting their power.
What do you think about, going back to Ukraine, in Europe, what do you think about this recent news that there's a military build-up around Kharkiv?
Look, we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's maybe very probable. I don't know the details of that, but Russians are now trying. It's summer,
So you think there'll be a big action before winter?
Of course. So we'll be. Action is already happening as we speak. Russians are in the overdrive. It's what they do. This, pedal metal, just like full speed, basically. They've deployed now 250,000 people. They brought in all the equipment from their stockpiles. They are now they're advancing. And because it's summer, that's the time to do it. So Russian offensive has already been ongoing for the past 4, 5, 6 weeks.
Yeah, during the peace talks.
Yeah, exactly. So they pretend engagement in the peace talks, but they don't negotiate in good faith. They're like, before we have a ceasefire, we have to eliminate root causes of war. Do you know what is the root cause of war?
Their invasion, assumably.
Yeah, but the root cause of war is Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine is an independent state. This is what the root cause of war. So what they are suggesting is that Ukraine stops to exist, and that's when we're going to get ceasefire.
Okay.
And this is not possible.
We've seen recently that US President Donald Trump has come out and said he doesn't like what President Putin is doing, that they're negotiating bad faith. I think he used the words that something is wrong with Putin, and that he's killing people. What do you think is the next, outcome there? Will we see US take a harder line against Russia, or what is Ukraine's perspective about what should happen at this point?
I wouldn't speculate on this. It's up to Donald Trump to decide what he's going to do next.
But what should Ukraine suggest?
No, our suggestion is that Russians will really only negotiate when they are weakened, when they see strengths. It's the only time when they'll come to a table. And to create that pressure, we need to take away all the immobilized Russian assets, $300 billion of those.
Yep.
We have to stop buying Russian oil. We have to impose heavy sanctions on the shadow fleet to prevent other third world countries from buying that oil or global sales. We have to impose more sanctions on the Russian banking industry, on the Russian, nuclear sector, Rosatom, one of those. And we, need to crack down on Russia seriously. And then when they're weakened, they will start negotiating. Otherwise, they're emboldened.
If that's the case, if it is a Russian, they are brought to the table at their knees, basically, isn't that putting Putin in a loss of face? That might be terminal for his leadership. That, potentially in Russia, that could kill him. Is that the way that it's going to work out? Is that a good move?
What do you mean? Is something going to happen to Russia?
Russian
president?
Yeah, I mean that if Russia is brought to the negotiating table forcefully, that potentially is a loss of face for President Vladimir Putin. Yeah. It could be his death. I mean, Russia is a dangerous place.
100%. I think this is what's going to happen anyways. It's just a matter of time when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because he can still go on for another 5 years or so. But that's pretty much. You see, the problem is for Putin, he cannot stop. Because if he does, as you suggested, that will create lots of domestic issues for him. So he can maintain this war. He's already changed the economy of the country. It's all on the war footing. And it just, this is what's happening.
Doesn't that mean that there's no option for peace then? The war can only end if Russia loses significantly.
I don't know. I mean, Russia will stop fighting only when they are pressured to do so. For now, I don't see that pressure.
Okay. Yeah. What else have we been seeing from support from the Australian government? We've seen the Abrams being sent across.
Yeah, they're on
Is
the
there
way.
an expected date or time that you've seen?
It's confidential information, but they should arrive soon into Europe. And
the Ukrainian military can use them effectively?
Yeah, we can use them. Look, I mean, as you know, in today's world, tanks or any other equipment, utility of that is very limited. Anything that comes to a battlefield is destroyed very quickly.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Yeah.
With drones, right?
Yeah.
So there is still an application. There is still, there is still a purpose how the tanks could be used. But like for instance, like Bushmasters. Bushmasters, we've been using them very effectively. But 120 Bushmasters that Australian government has generously provided. Most of them are destroyed. Most of them are destroyed. Many need repair. I don't know even how many are operating. We're asking the Australian government to provide another 200 Bushmasters. You produce them here in Bendigo. You can send more. We need some spare parts. We are asking for M113s. These are old APCs. Yeah. But we need them. We use them for medical evacuation.
Yeah.
Because currently we're evacuating people from the battlefields in trucks, which have no protection.
Utes and things.
So we need at least an M113 on tracks actually, which works in any terrain. If it's, because Bushmasters only operate when it's dry. When it becomes wet, it gets boggled down in mud. So you need something on tracks which can go through any terrain. And this is how we use, those vehicles. We need your help with drones as well. But
I was going to ask about counter-drone systems. We know that the Ukrainians have been using Slinger counter-drone systems.
Yeah, it was actually supplied,
produced in Australia.
They're produced in Australia, but were supplied by Americans,
Yeah.
So 10 of those Slingers were bought by Pentagon for Ukraine last year. They've been, from what I know, they've been quite effective, but you need to talk to US on that. Because I haven't seen the feedback. But we need any air defense systems possible, and especially from the drones right now. Drone Shield has been providing some of their equipment. We need to check how effective it is or not, because Russians change the way they send their drones, and they they basically, those counter drone system no longer work. Many of them don't work anymore, because what worked 3 years ago certainly does not work anymore. And
They need to
Russians
be
always
updated.
Yeah. Because now what Russians, and this is actually, by the way, something new that Russians have started doing. So they send their drones, which are relying on the communications they get from commercial providers in Ukraine. So they're not linked up to the satellite, as most of the others were, because how air defense system work, you blind the drone. So in this particular case, you cannot blind it because it's not connected to a satellite. And it relies on commercial telecom companies from in the area where it flies. It uses artificial intelligence to find a target and just goes there. So traditional air defense, kind of electronic warfare, does not work.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you only need to physically destroy it if you hit it before it hits the target, right? And then the way they fly, so they get into Ukraine, they fly very low, so they're not detected. And then when they go into the city, they go like 3 kilometers up or 2.5 kilometers up. Then you cannot detect it with regular weapons, like whatever, with
Machine
bullets,
guns and things,
machine
yep.
guns is
Yep.
too high. And then it finds the target and just flies in. And then try to shoot down when it falls down, basically.
Yeah, it's a lot harder.
It is.
Terminal.
So, but this is like basic stuff, which is now happening, and they've learned it, right? So it was not like that last year. So 1 year later, they've been learning that, and also like their capacity to produce drones. So last year, Russians were producing about 500 Shahed drones, which are Iranian model
the copies
drones.
of the Shahed.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they could produce 500 per month. Now they can produce 500 in 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's their the Russian Geran.
Yeah,
4.
Geran. Yeah.
Wow, that is impressive. Yeah, I mean, it's deadly
is.
industry, basically.
It is.
I understand also they've opened a road or train links between North Korea as well, so they have more standardized
Absolutely.
things there now.
By the way, most of the missiles that now they use, ballistic missiles, are Korean. Because they've run out of their own, so they now use ballistic missiles from Korea, and they destroy Ukraine with those.
Wow. Would you say it's a worsening situation, or it's
Yes, it's worsening. It's not getting better, for sure.
Yeah.
It does look like it, because, look, we need more long-range capabilities. We need more missiles for air defense. We need, actually, boots on the ground, believe it or not. I mean, of course, in the coalition of the willing, we're all discussing potential peacekeeping troops for deterrence, but I don't see Russians stopping anytime soon. How can we force them to stop?
Yeah.
If Europeans are not committed to Ukraine, it just because Russians, they won't stop in Ukraine. That's the whole point. And if people think they will stop in Ukraine, they're just disillusioned. I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. Because what Putin wants America to abandon Europe.
Right.
Putin wants to dismantle European Union. And then Putin wants to take over whatever he wants. Well, he creates a mess.
Like a new Soviet Union style bloc, I guess.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
In terms of the American support there, what's your thoughts on the minerals deal? There was a minerals deal announced, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. The US would, I guess, invest in some minerals infrastructure. Ukraine would supply some.
Yeah,
I don't think they called it reimbursement, but that's kind of what it sounded like, right?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because yesterday in Canberra we had a whole lunch event at a National Press Club organized by the University of Canberra, and I was very pleased that Honourable Bill Shorten was there as a Vice Chancellor of University of Canberra, but it was funded by Jean Monnet Center, which is a Europe-funded program, and done by a Professor Ivana Demjanovic. She is with University of Canberra. So we had a panel discussion, and I spoke there on critical minerals and rare earth minerals in the context of the recent deal between America and Ukraine. But we also had Tanya Constable from the Minerals Council, and we had a Danish ambassador, we had an EU ambassador. So we all spoke about how we can create a global critical minerals and rare earth alliance of democracies, because in today's world, as you know, China has a monopoly on rare earth, and many of the rare earth materials are used in defense industry. And I use two examples. One example is antimony, which is used in ammunition, and antimony is a rare earth
Right.
It helps to detonate an explosive in the ammunition.
Okay, it's a fuse or something?
Something like that. And like, for instance, Pentagon has only 12 months of a strategic stockpile of antimony. And China has a near monopoly on that.
Okay.
Another one is scandium, which is a very strong rare earth. It's stronger than titanium.
Right.
So
Very useful.
Yeah, Russian fighter jets, the nose of the Russian fighter jet is made out of scandium.
Okay.
Whereas Americans use titanium for F-35s.
Okay.
But Chinese sell scandium only to 3 countries. It's Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they use scandium themselves.
Okay. Monopolizing it a little bit.
Correct. But then there are lots of other magnetic metals and other metals which are used in renewables, but also used in dual technology, whatnot, right? So this is just 2 examples that China having a monopoly on processing of rare earth can use it as a leverage and basically entire defense industries in different countries depend on the steady supply from China. So now it's what the challenge is. We need to create processing outside of China to kind of de-risk China and all of that. So we need to build processing here, and Australian government is doing some of that on the critical mineral side. Europeans are now doing it, but we can use Ukraine as a powerhouse for the processing of critical minerals and rare earth minerals.
And of course, any infrastructure would be beneficial as well.
Absolutely. And this is where we need Australia, because as Tanya Constable said yesterday, that Australia is the Saudi Arabia of the mining sector. Basically, what oil is for Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia for oil, this is what Australia is in the mining world, right?
Yes.
Is the Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. I mean, there's 70% of uranium, I think, in
100%.
in the world is in Australia.
And by the way, we are sourcing some of the uranium for our nuclear industry.
Okay.
So this is what we do, and this is by the way another example, because
Is there, just on that point, is there a deal that can be made there between nuclear industry and Ukraine and Australia? Do you think that's an option?
No, but we already do it. We already buy uranium from you.
Yeah.
It just goes to France or it goes to Sweden, enriched there, and we get it as nuclear fuel. So we've been buying your stuff a long time ago.
Yeah.
But the way we buy it, we used to buy it, through Westinghouse, an American company, but now Westinghouse was bought by Canadian company Comicon, and they buy it from you, enrich it there. So it's not reflected in our bilateral trade between Ukraine and Australia, but it's reflected in your trade with France or EU on that side. So we are already cooperating. As you know, Ukraine has 15 nuclear reactors. 6 of them are now held hostage by the Russians. 9 of them are operating. Before the war, 50% of our power generation was nuclear. Now we rely on nuclear much more. Probably nuclear now is like 75-80% of our power supply. But once we're going to restore our power generation, which Russians have destroyed, you'll have the source of the cheapest energy, which is nuclear.
Yep.
And you need energy to process critical minerals. You need lots of cheap energy. And this is what we have. So apart from deposits of different rare earth minerals and critical minerals, we want to build processing facilities in Western Ukraine, in the protected areas, where we can then cater to the US needs, to European needs. We can send rare earth to Australia. So we see it as an alliance between Ukraine, Australia, America, and Europe, where we can work together in that space.
I think that about wraps it up for the Defence Connect podcast today. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Well, always good to talk about Ukraine and get a bit of an inside perspective into what's happening in Europe.
Thanks a lot. Anytime.